Blue Light for Change, and we are now talking to Brett Jenkins, who is a police officer from South Wales Police. Tell us about your early career as a police officer. When did you join the force? And take us through that.
Yeah, I joined South Wales Police as a cadet in September 1983. Had a year with diverse experience with that role, but then it was good preparation for becoming a police officer in September 1984. Really enjoyed the enrollment and the training, and was what I class as a high performer really all throughout the probation and through my attachment to division. And basically, I was sent to Caerphilly, which was quite a difficult sector to work. Very busy, a lot of crime going on, fervent nightlife, but that led to public order as well. And of course, unfortunately, we had the industrial dispute with the miners going on at the same time. So there was a lot of factors that made it a challenging but rewarding place to work as well. Camaraderie was really strong on the shift, but experienced, a very large number of incidents. My first ever call was a cot death in a place in Lansbury Park, and that I wouldn't say that set the stall out, but that certainly opened my eyes to the degree of emotional distress that I would be exposed to throughout my career, and that was shortly followed then with a suicide. But yeah, I stayed in the Caerphilly sector, dealt a lot with crime, public order. Unfortunately, there were quite a few murders there as well, road traffic accidents. But rose to the challenge, I suppose, and was part of a shift that was integral to everybody working together. There was about 5 or 6 of us on a shift there, and just continued developing my policing career, but being exposed to more and more trauma as I was going through my police career or pathway, whichever way you want to call it. And then I qualified quite early then with promotion exams, and went on some of the community teams, which were like an unofficial drug squad as well. But we could be tasked with anything that was a difficult or problem orientated policing, as they would describe it now. And eventually then on to CID. Again, numerous investigations, traumatic incidents, arsons, deaths, fires, murders, along with what I would describe as run-of-the-mill crime, as I would describe it, unfortunately. And then, again, fortunate enough to get promoted and go to Barry, which was another challenging area. It's quite famous for this for its catchment of car thieves, because I remember, in fact, I had worked on a murder with a superintendent, and I asked, how did I come to be promoted to Barry, living 25, 30 mile away? And he confessed, he said, look, I work with you on one of the high profile murders and I want to do here. And yeah, I stayed there for about 14 months. And then returned back to the valleys, as I would describe it, the Rhondda and Cynnon valleys. And it became increasingly aware that I was carrying a lot of emotional damage. I wasn't sleeping. I was overprotective of the staff, or I was always looking to protect the staff or the officers. And yeah, that culminated in me on a number of occasions. I liked into my managers and saying, look, I'm suffering with things. I need to get a vent. I need a break in everything that's going on. And as a stopgap, I was allowed to go into the custody suite for a limited period of time. But very shortly later, I was asked if I would go on CID to cover a vacancy. And when I was there was another murder, which that was dealt with initially by a full team with about 26, 27 and an SIO. But I went on leave, and when I came back, it's a good example of there were approximately, I would say, 3,500 pages of evidence with numerous spin-off inquiries that I was tasked with sorting out with one singular officer, my close friend Paul Barnes. So in that period of time, I spent a week, probably 12, 14 hours a day reading through that evidence to compile action plans. But after that, again, I returned back to division, but it wasn't long before disrupted sleep, angry outbursts, and I realised I was probably a difficult person to get on with as well. It's quite damaging. But in a constant state of vigilance and hypervigilance and flashbacks as well. And I'm going to get upset talking about it now.
Okay. Take your time because this is your opportunity to tell your story to everybody. All right, so just take your time.
Yeah. And I had to face up to the fact that I was human, you know. It was really difficult to accept that one of the particular events, I think, has just overloaded me with distress and emotion, and that's when I was on CID up in Aberdeen. I was asked to go up into an incident room with the murder of a toddler, and when I was up there, I was collating the evidence. I was seeing every single exhibit that came in, which I was logging, and then I can remember one of the police officers came in because we did a house search. The little one was taken to hospital and had a catalogue of injuries, which I don't really want to say them all because I get upset. But he mentioned there was a tooth in the address where the little one had been, you know, before being assaulted and subsequently passing away. And I was tasked to recover the tooth. I couldn't even remember the fact that I had done it. But I went up there, found the tooth, and all the time I was envisaging how this child had been thrown against the wall, limbs broken, and then after that, I logged the exhibits in, and then I was tasked with actually taking the tooth to Cardiff Royal Infirmary, which is where the lad's body was, and liaising with the head of dental, the professor of dentistry there. So then I took the tooth down, and I had put the tooth in his mouth so that we could prove the tooth was knocked out.
Well,
so
to explain that process to people who are not involved in the police or anything else like that, ordinary members of the public that are watching, you, because of an evidential requirement, you had to be the person to put that tooth back into that dead body. That's what you had to do.
Yeah.
Okay. When did you realise you couldn't do it anymore?
This is upsetting as well, because I hadn't been sleeping, and I realised that from that moment in time, it took something away from me, and I think it was the feeling of being safe in the job, as we all termed it. And I was constantly checking on my children every 20 minutes to make sure they were breathing. My son, I'm not sure if my son hadn't even been born. My daughter was like a similar age to the little one, but it was just something that never left me. I was just obsessed that something was going to happen to my children, and it's something that I sort of, I don't know if the right word is, coped. I just existed every day to protect my family and my children, and I went to work and I did this. But it's weird. It's like you've got different dimensions to your thought process. I've got, this image of this little boy who's post-mortem with everything that he's been through, like stuck in my brain, and it's a constant vision. It's not something that flashes back. It's something that's there. It's like an imprint embossed in my vision, and I wasn't sleeping. I was getting angrier, more distraught, all the while accumulating more events and incidents. And the one day I heard my daughter saying, "Daddy's not well," and um, uh, that's a pretty hard thing for a father to hear the child say.
Mm.
So I was in work and I was saying, look, I'm not coping, and I didn't even realise. I actually documented in my pocketbook that I was suffering with flashbacks and was feeling so unwell and trying to chase things up. But I was in there. I can remember I was attached to a file preparation unit for a period of time, and I was involved. I can remember I got involved in an incident in Spain, and the police discharged their firearms, and I came back, and I was like, this is an opportunity for me to actually speak to someone and tell them what's going on and what's going on in my mind, because it's weird. The culture of not disclosing how you're feeling in the police is quite or was quite destructive, and I was probably fallen victim to that culture, particularly from the 80s when I joined. So I was.
When the time came for you to finally put your hand in the air and say,
Yeah,
I can't do this anymore, I can't cope, from that point on, how supported were you by South Wales Police?
so South Wales Police, when I was initially seen by the force medical advisor, I was referred into mental health services pretty quickly, and it was identified that I had elements of post-traumatic stress disorder, but I also had something that they call prolonged duress stress disorder. I've since been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is something they've only recognised since, I think, 2022. So initially there was arrangements that I would be supported and see a psychiatrist in Cardiff, R&R Consulting, and they said, look, we'll pay for 16 sessions. Once they're done, then we can look at what your options are with returning to work. So I had been attending there, and I had a phone call out of the blue, and they said, "Oh, have you had 10 sessions already?" And this was like two weeks later, or 3 weeks. And I said, no. I said, I've only had one session or two. And they went, why is that? It's 2 or 3 weeks down the line. And I said, no, under cognitive behavior therapy and psychological interventions, where I was getting really distressed and had vivid recall of so many incidents, I said they can only do that like once a fortnight, and that's pushing the pace on it as well. And then South Wales Police then put me on half pay, I think it was, and stopped the funding for the sessions. And I can remember thinking, I don't know what to do. I'd offer to go back to work. The force doctor said I was too much of a risk to anyone and myself to do that. And I ended up borrowing money off my mother to carry on paying for the sessions. I had £1,000 off, I can remember, because the sessions I think were £95 each. But from that point on, then, was there any support? No. And I even had my medication was going up and up. So I was on a level of citalopram, which I think was 60 milligrams a day, which I don't think is permitted now. But the doctor also identified, because of my nature and my condition, I was having a lot of adrenaline surges. So I was defeating medications. So then I was given, I think it's promethazine or antihistamines that have a slowing effect on you as well. So I can remember that it's quite sad to recall looking at a blank telly all day in my dressing gown, not washing, not getting ready, being unkempt for days, just going around in my slippers. But I and my so-called federation rep then contacted me out of the blue and said, "Oh, do you mind if we come up and have a meeting?" He said, "Nothing official, just want to check you're okay." And I said, "Yeah, no problem." I said, I don't really know what I'm doing at the moment. I said, because my medication is quite high, and I don't really know what I'm doing as well. And when my Fed rep turned up, he had facilitated a disciplinary meeting with HR and the inspector for the custody services. And in fairness, the representative from HR actually picked up I didn't know what was going on and was heavily medicated. But I was, I was totally unaware what the process was, what the purpose of the meeting genuinely was for. And that was my experience there. But yeah, I just continued going back and forth mental health services then. And the force medical officer, Hugh Davis, said, "Look, Brett, there's no way you can come back." He said, he said the chronicity you've got of your PTSD, he said, means that it's not really safe for you or anyone else for you to return back to duty. And then, an application was put in for ill health retirement, which luckily enough, was approved then in 2008. But unfortunately, the same doctor, Dr. Davis, was later used against police regulations, I believe, to actually review my application for injury on duty. And I thought, well, he should have been excluded because he's the person who recommended me for retirement, and he challenged the selected medical practitioner with his first outcome.
How were you treated by the senior management team at South Wales Police through that entire process?
Well, I was shocked since I've left and had disclosure of what's been said and what's been written. I had very, very little interaction with the senior management team. My federation rep, the contact, was very haphazard because he was actually sitting within the welfare department of HR as a retired police officer who'd returned to the organisation. So it was very, very flimsy, if non-existent. And I've got no qualms in saying that my close friend, who I worked with, if it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't have got to the end of the tunnel, because he used to come up and see me in the house, and we'd be here, and he'd be up here till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And that was probably every week, if not twice a week as well. and I feel ashamed that I haven't got as much contact that I should have with that individual now, because I would say he went a long way for me not losing my life as well.
And arguably, you would say, or I would say anyway, that the role that he had there, that should have been the organisation that you gave all your service to doing that. They should have done that. They should have provided that. They shouldn't have just cut these sessions because, let's face it, probably all about the money. Money is the root of all evil, as they say. And that's the experience that we're hearing from people on Blue Light for Change. There just is not the support there.
Yeah, from my experience, there were a couple of key individuals, and I later found out that I think again I was so unwell when I was receiving documentation, and I wasn't supported by my Fed rep who was sitting in welfare with the HR department. There were decisions made around pay and process and everything else, and I'm like, well, I'm on my own. I'm on my own here. I can't communicate or function properly, and it's even down to the underhanded tactics of, and this still exists to this day. I've asked for South Wales Police to recover my witness statement with regards to duties around the child murder and my exhibits officer duties, but instead they appointed a retired inspector, a chief inspector, who was well known to be quite adverse to any form of sickness payment and hostile in saying, and I think his approach was, if you put people on half pay, it gives them better focus to return to work. It doesn't look at the detriment to their mental health. It's purely, this is how and this is written in documents as well, on sickness reviews. So they actually canvassed two officers who had been on the murder case. So you're talking about 96, 97. So I retired 2008. So where I applied there, they then went back to those officers rather than recovering my statement from the murder file. And the officer said, I can't really recall what Brett was doing. I know he was there, or I believe he'd recovered a tooth, but I don't think he had a major role. And these were the interviewing officers who were my colleagues and friends as well. And I said, I don't blame them for not being able to recall that, because I've interviewed on murders, and I couldn't tell you who was in the background. I was only concentrating on the interview. Yet they produced.
You'd asked them to provide you with your witness statement, not talk to the other officers who were there. So where was the statement that you requested?
It's never been produced, and we're still going through process now with the injury on duty process. That has been asked for on a number of occasions, and it's just never forthcoming. And I said, and the one thing I want to emphasize is, I'm not somebody who ever wanted to take advantage of the system. In fact, when I joined, I was one of the people who said, I'll never be like that. And there I was, 20 odd years later down the line, actually suffering like I didn't appreciate that other people had. And yeah, it's hard to put into words the disappointment and despondency you feel to an organisation that you've committed the best or most productive years of your life to. All of us can see an element of tragedy and traumatic events, but some of us see more than others. And we've all got different circumstances and weaknesses and strengths. And I thought, for a while, I would have said, yeah, I'm invincible. And that was the way that I suppose we like to perceive ourselves when we were younger as well. And it's not, we are so fallible as individuals. And I said the best thing I ever did was realize that I had a limit to what I could do. because I've used the terminology a lot. I said it's like walking around with a Superman S on your chest, because that's who you're perceived and who you've got to be to your shift and everybody else. But it'll drag you under the water. And the moment you take that off, you actually become not a weaker, but what's the word? A better, more considerate human being as well. And it was difficult for me to face up to my own weaknesses, but so glad that I did. I just wish that the police in general, right across the UK, could understand that, it's a traumatic job, and people sacrifice a lot, and that's all we want is fair treatment out of the system, not manipulation and concealment, as I would describe it.
So when you retired, take us through the process of that. What actually happened? How were you? You were obviously given your full police pension.
No, I joined in September 1984, and then I was pensioned off in I think it was January the 20th, 2008. So I had the enhanced pension through ill health, and I was in the house then. I would go for mental health interventions with my psychiatric nurse, and I was every fortnight, or if I'd had a particularly bad session, he would say, let's give it a gap of 3 weeks. And then I realised then, I was like, I should ask for my injury on duty pension. So I know I made contact with my federation rep and said, look, can you start looking at this? And he called me back, and I can't remember all the details because of one, of how unwell I was, and secondly because of the time. And I said, what's happening with my application for this injury on duty? And then I can remember he rang me back and he said, you've been reviewed. And I was really upset because I was always in a hyper vigilant state and easily distressed. I was crying and I said, I can't remember going. I can't remember being there. And he said, you weren't there. You were reviewed on paper. And I said, well, I said I was unaware of that. I said, I'm not sure if documents were sent through, but I know that at some point I was told that the injury on duty had been reviewed and I wasn't awarded it. And I signed a document saying, well, I'd like to appeal it. But again, no contact from the Fed rep and everything else. And it just dissipated. And I later contacted South Wales Police again then to say, can I progress this injury on duty? And a member of HR staff said, no, the person hasn't completed the paperwork in the set time. As far as we're concerned, that's the matter concluded. And I said, well, one, I was serious. I was unaware I was on the seriously mental health register. And I said, well, how do you appeal something when you're ill and you don't know what's really going on? But it was basically, I think, sideswiped or swept under the carpet. And then it was one of those things where I actually sat back and thought, I haven't got the mental strength or energy to challenge this. I've just got to get on with my life. And I was still hyper vigilant. I am to this day. I'm engaged. And the first thing that my partner said to me was, she said, you scan everybody in the room all the time. And I said, I can't help it. I said, I'm constantly And she thought I was looking at, at other people. And I said, I'm not looking at other people. I said, I'm just assessing everything all the time. I said, I can't help it. It's something that doesn't go away. And, I probably going off subject here, but it's like, even in work where I'm with the NHS now, we had a, we had a child killed on site, and it sort of zooms everything in, it hones everything in again, and then in the locality,
Trigger.
yeah. And then when I was in Bridgend, there were a couple of incidents involving children again, and I'm in bed crying my eyes out, and people say, "Oh, what's wrong with you?" And I said, "Well, if you've seen something that you can't ever get rid of, I said, you just relive that experience all the time, and it's difficult, really difficult. Even programs will do it, and the news, anything."
I mean, it is that, isn't it? It's, the simple little triggers in life that people don't see, and often, you won't see until it actually happens, and then suddenly those memories will come flashing back. And I know that Mick, my colleague, who I am doing Blue Light for Change with, we started this project together. He very much suffers the same as you. So
Yeah.
complex PTSD from years as an army officer and then involved with the police. So you are by far not alone. And I want to just let you know that. You know it anyway, but you're not alone. And the whole aim of this project is to provide support to you, and also for you to reach out and to try and help somebody else that might be going through this, because there will be people who are sitting at home and watching this interview and seeing how emotional you are getting, and they are exactly the same, and they think that they're all on their own as well, and they're left on their own by the police.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like a token gesture of, let's give a little token effort to try and get this officer back to work. But we're not interested in actually fixing them. We're not interested in that. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to still build that up. So in terms of your ill health pension, you still haven't got your injury on duty pension. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, that's right. I was living and coping with the symptoms, and how would I describe it? Just trying to suppress everything. So where I'm employed or doing anything, it's been identified through one of the therapists that I actually conceal my symptoms through performance or diversion. So, I've got to be careful what I say, but I'll work till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning on projects that I'm working on, or informational incidents that I'm working on. But I got assessed, I'm trying to think when it was. I think it was 2023. There was a lead clinical psychologist arranged for me to have an assessment with him down in Newport, and she was a breath of fresh air to speak to. Sorry again.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, she sat me down in the room, and it's the first time that I ever felt that someone was speaking to me, apart from my CPN. It was great. I was like, I'm actually a face. I'm actually a person. And I broke down. I started telling her probably about 20, 30 incidents that I'd been involved in, but the main one with regards the murder. And she actually said, Brett, she said, you've got to be kinder to yourself. But she also said to me, she said, your behaviour skills, she said, is so intense. She said, I was really worried I was going to have to call someone in. She said, because the amount of energy that you can release, she said, is tangible in the room. She said, and she said it's distressing to see it as well. But I did that. Then I've had two lots of sessions, Canopy, and an excellent organisation for PTSD. So I had sessions with them, and they said my symptoms.
Give me their name again.
Canopy.
Canopy.
Yeah, CANOPI. And they said your symptoms are so strong and embedded. You're gonna. We're not going to get as far down the treatment line. We're just going to have to do awareness and coping. And then I had inputs with mental health, and then I was told that the therapy I would need is I'm trying to think, eye movement desensitization.
EMDR.
Yeah, and I'm on the waiting list for that. But of course, I submitted that paperwork into South Wales Police and started launching the process. I'm thinking it's not right. I should progress this. I got assessed by a selected medical practitioner who's quite well known in the UK. No mental health qualifications, and he basically said, "Oh, you haven't got complex post-traumatic stress disorder. You've got obsessional behaviours." And so somebody who
was he employed by South Wales Police?
Yeah, he's employed to. They're quite crafty how they do it. It's almost like quasi responsibility. So he prepared the report. I then asked for an appeal, and the appeal was arranged. When we served,
was that an independent appeal, Brett? An independent appeal?
The appeal that was to be arranged is through the Home Office Police Medical Appeal Boards, the PMABs.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So South Wales Police started to arrange that. Then they were making claims that I hadn't appealed, and obviously it said that I had. So they took legal advice then with counsel and brought up a whole raft of issues which were challenged by my IOD Limited, which are my solicitors and legal reps. So once that was all put in together, then they actually waited until under a week before the PMAB was due to be held, and then raised another raft of questions, resulting in the PMAB being cancelled at short notice, with them violate. I don't know the timelines. They had violated the rulings on times and disclosures, and they were expected to foot the bill for it. But then what happened in the meantime was there was a case that was heard in December around, very similar to my circumstances, on appeals, delays, reconsideration, extra evidence, new reports. And that case was heard in December and totally flew in the face of what the legal stance of by counsel from London. Am I allowed to say his name?
We're not really going into names.
Yeah. So the council's position was totally negated by the judicial review and judgment. So that was then submitted back to them. What happened then is South Wales Police said, "Oh, right, we've got that now." The council suddenly could no longer have the capacity to represent them out of the blue after being told he was reviewing the papers. And then they said, "Oh, we need an extension in order to see counsel again," and a new counsel. New counsel was never employed or consulted with. And the original person who had caused me issues in human resources appears with legal services to have then penned a letter saying our position is that it was an internal review, not a formal reconsideration, and as a result, we claim that the Police Medical Appeal Board doesn't have jurisdiction to sit and hear the appeal. So that's in the process of being challenged now. But a lot of it it's underhanded. There's no integrity, and there's no honesty. And even my case management file deliberately omitted my diagnostic report from the clinical psychologist after me expressly.
And so all of this you're going through, and how long would you say you've been fighting this? How long has it been going on?
I probably step back and approach South Wales Police around about 2023, and
Right.
it that's one of the things there is. Or you've come back now, and I said people with traumatic events and memories. Probably a lot of the time, I think police officers are frightened to go into that arena because of the amount of distress and revisiting that it'll cause them. And I thought I've always lived my principles of being honest and for standing up for what's right. And I thought I haven't even done it for myself, and I felt strongly that I should. But the what's the word? The tactics or the approach by South Wales Police and the pension authority is one of deny, procrastinate, alter, put obstructions in, put legal arguments in that don't exist. There's always something that they will look to manipulate, a challenge or hurdle in the way. And I think they just want people to give up. Or if I'm honest, I think they probably like some of them to pass away before they get to that stage as well. It's
I mean, when you really think about it, and we're going to wrap up shortly because I'm aware that this is quite taxing for you. We've all seen just how emotional you've got, and I thank you for having the courage of coming forward and speaking to us here. All right, but when it comes down to it, this surely is all about money. It's all about we don't want to pay out, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's lip service paid to and I'll say about the responder program. Everyone was impacted, and how brilliant the responder program was to understand what officers are exposed to and the impacts it has. And that's great when you get that public support, understanding, and empathy with it. But then when the organisations themselves deny things that you've seen far worse and far more repeated, far regular, far more intense, and it's not it's not acting. This is real life then, and the approach is save money at all costs through any tactic, even through the omission of evidence reports, and claiming bizarre, legal grounds, or it's just it's totally flies in the face of honesty and integrity, public values, and also the policing covenant as well. We've got chief officers of police saying how valid, how valid the resources are and how important it is we look after them. But I feel as though as soon as you've gone past your sell-by date or you're not part of it, it's like, well, how do we save money here? And it's a sad testament to the modern, the modern position that we're in.
Well, listen, Brett, I want to personally, on behalf of me, Mick, and everybody watching this who have sat through this entire interview, just to say a big thank you to you because, this product has only recently got off the ground. We will see where it goes. But obviously, one of our big striving aims really is to improve the behaviour of the police in the UK, in England, Wales, Scotland, towards their staff. Because lest we forget, when you sign up to be a police officer and you take that oath, you give up your life. You do give up your life because you are subject to all of these rules, all of the rules that they make. And when push comes to shove, you should be supported absolutely to get better.
Yeah.
And that if we do nothing else, then if we do nothing else but just help you or one other person to think that they've had their opportunity to tell their story, we've done our job. But thank you for having the courage. It's been absolutely brilliant to speak to you today. I'm so sorry that it's been at times quite upsetting for you, but hopefully we gave you the time to just kind of gather your thoughts.
No, I'm really grateful for being able to speak to you. And the one thing I'd say is, like, one person coming to harm because of what they've been exposed to is too many, and unfortunately, it's way more than that. And if that's the good that comes out of it, then brilliant work, well done.